Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Michaela Peters, or Mikaela Peters, as they call me in Finland. So I always feel like I'm on borrowed time here while the baby is sleeping, and it's probably not going to be going on for too much longer because she's already been asleep for a long time. I had the opportunity to clean my whole house while she's been asleep, which was very important because I have the family baby team coming tomorrow, and I don't want them to think that I'm a slob. I mean, it really wasn't that bad, but it was just like I wanted to sweep the floors, and I'm still doing some laundry. That seems to be like the daily activity, and then what other things are happening. Really, it's a lot of laundry and putting away clean laundry. Yeah, that's pretty much what's going on, I would say, for sure. But anyway, I want to take the time to do this video, and I had an idea that I was trying to figure out what channel to put this on, but I want to talk about what it feels like living in small town Finland. So the ironic part is for the Finnish people watching this, it's like, haha, Lappeenranta is not a small town. On one hand, you are correct. On the other hand, as a foreign person, it is indeed a small town. I remember when I used to intern at NASA way back when in 2017 through 2019, and I remember whenever you would move, like you'd be driving and you would enter one town from another, there would be a sign that would say the name of the town and the population. And the population usually was like 150,000. So the idea that Lappeenranta is sort of like a bigger town or city on the like spectrum of like Finnish populations, it is still very small. It's got like 71,000 or something like that. Yeah, don't quote me on that, but somewhere around there. Yeah, so if you're living in a suburb, which, you know, NASA technically is in Houston in Texas, like where I was, but I was still in a more suburban area, and I'm talking about the size of the suburban towns like near that, because it's very weird the way it works. Is like proper Houston is like the circle, and then there's this leg that goes out and grabs NASA, so to speak, and that's what makes it technically in Houston. So there are like some random neighborhoods near NASA that are technically Houston, and the rest are like Clear Lake, and what are the other names of some of them? Kima, League City. I don't know. Where did I live? One time I lived in Houston, one time I lived in League City, and one time I lived in, where was the first place I lived? I forget. But whatever. One of those suburbs. Clear Lake. I think I lived in Clear Lake. I don't know. I lived in like 3 different places when I was there. Yeah, I've lived in a lot of places. It's kind of why I just didn't want to keep living in different places. It gets to be old after a while. But anyway, so another thing that I'd like to make people aware of is like, I come from New Jersey, and the population of New Jersey alone, and New Jersey is like, it is not the smallest state in the U.S. I think technically Rhode Island is. It takes like 1 hour to drive across the whole thing. New Jersey, I think if you drove from top to bottom, it would probably take about 4 hours. I'm pretty sure I looked this up once. But our population is 9 million, okay? And that's for like one state. I'm pretty sure that New York City is like 20 million or more than that. I think like proper Helsinki is 700,000, but then if you factor in Helsinki Vantaa Espoo, it's definitely like a million. So, you know, I really try to get this across to people. Yes, if you think about that, actually, I am thinking about that. It's like at least 1/5 of Finland's population lives in the capital region, which like makes sense, you know. So yeah, we're comparing 9 million all in one state alone to 5.5 million all in one country alone. So what I'm trying to get at is the fact that what starts to happen is that it's very yeah, I can't see without my glasses. All right, this is the like starting to wake up phase, so then we wait until there's like a fully awake kind of situation, because I know that like when the baby's sleeping, it's best to just leave them alone. This is what I figured out. And then they will alert you when they want to wake up and be changed. It's pretty common that like there will be random crying, and it's not just hunger, it's like the diaper is dirty, and that's kind of it. So it's honestly a pretty easy job. It's just the problem is it's like a 24/7 job. It's like shift work, and the morning hours are always the worst. Ugh, I feel like I don't even know what's going on in the middle of the night when I have to take care of the diapers and the feeding and stuff. And then usually I wake up really late at 11, which I can't do because tomorrow I think they're coming at 10 or 11. I gotta check. I think it's 11. Okay, whatever. So, as I'm trying to explain, it's just that, okay, let's say I have beef with somebody, you know, like something goes badly. In New Jersey, the probability of me seeing them ever again in my life is like 0. In Finland, it just feels like the probability of that is like at least 50%. And the funny thing is like, All right, this is an embarrassing story, and I've talked about this a lot, like, previously, but I'm gonna try to, like, spark note it here. Like, I had a pretty traumatic experience. You know what? I'm gonna be honest. My whole master's degree was a pretty traumatic experience. I think when I was going to graduate, I almost like cried of relief because I was just like, it was so hard. Like the academic aspect was not hard. It was more of just like the dealing with people aspect. Spoken like a true autist. Yeah. It was very funny. I did a random Google yesterday while I was confined and breastfeeding. This happens a lot now. And I was like, why don't people understand sarcasm? And it's like literally the top answer is autism. And I'm like, so I've gone my whole life not understanding sarcasm. And I never thought that like that was an issue. And I never thought to Google this. And then I was like kind of disappointed in myself for not realizing it. But the thing I talk about also is like at age 15, I was like, hey, parents, I think I'm autistic. And then they're like, no, you're not. And I was like, okay. And then I moved on. Anyway, so yes, but I talk about that quite a lot. And the one person who approached me in La Pedronta and was like, I love your channel, was because she's like, I love how much you talk about autism. Keep doing it. And I'm like, cool. So autism awareness. There we go. I like the way one person in Sweden who's a teacher explained this to me. Autism is like a ladder, and some people have not climbed up the ladder at all, and some people are just like further up the ladder. So yeah. I'm on level 1 of the ladder, which is like not significant, but it is what it is. Sometimes I talk about how like at the beginning of doing this channel, I would like try to make myself make eye contact with the screen, and it just like doesn't feel natural. So I kind of stopped doing that because it's just not how I talk. So whatever. Okay. So as I was saying, yeah, so like it was pretty hard for me. A lot of the social stuff, even though I argue, you know, jokingly, not jokingly, that like most people in like an engineering setting are going to be autistic, because there's a reason for this. It has to do with the fact that it's like technical and not people oriented, so therefore it's easier. Yeah, so for instance, like being here because it's a tech university, like in La Pedronta, so there's a lot of engineers around, or when I was at NASA, same thing, you know, it's like a hub for that. Yeah, so anyway, what's my point with this? No, just that at the beginning it was really hard because, well, I think the one thing that's very hard is that, you know, trying to figure out who to be friends with, I guess. Yeah, like, all right, I was never really in a situation where I was kind of like stuck around people. I had a lot of independence in the US in terms of like, I did not live on campus. I commuted to campus, saved me a crap ton of money. Good for me. You know, I knew people from like running and swimming club, but I wasn't like BFFs or would hang out with any of them outside that. I would kind of describe it as like filling up my social meter. So like I would interact with people throughout the days, and that was throughout the day. And that was like enough for me to feel socially satisfied. I didn't need to be like BFFs with anybody or be hanging out with anybody outside of these activities that were pretty structured. I had like maybe like 5 friends I did that with, but like they all lived on campus and I didn't. So like I think I went out to bars like once or twice. And one of them was my 21st birthday. So like, does that even count? I also went with like my mom and my aunt, so it was like, it wasn't like a whole like, oh, we're getting trashed. I mean, I kind of did. And then I still had to wake up at 6:30 the next day and go rowing, because I was doing rowing at that time. And then I realized like, I'm never drinking again. And then I moved to Finland, and then I probably abused my liver for 2 years, and it's amazing it still functions, because that's how it be over here. I mean, so that's another good point to bring up, is that in La Pedronta, people are pretty bored and there's not a lot to do. So there is kind of like a pretty heavy drinking culture. And I think this was the first point at which I began to question my own relationship with alcohol. And I started to observe some things in my family, and I'm like, interesting. So anyway, obviously I haven't been drinking for a long time now, so it doesn't really matter. I'm going to be honest, like, and I was talking to my one Finnish friend about this yesterday, like, going out to bars in Finland is actually pretty normal as a pregnant person, because people just go to hang out with their friends. Like, I don't think bars are as much of hangout places in the US. Like, I was telling her, I was like, I went out to a bar, like, one time in the US, like, near where I live, and it was so, like, overstimulating that I couldn't handle it, and then I never went again. I was like, no, this is terrible. Like, why? But in Finland, they're really nice and understimulating, because the music is not too loud. There's karaoke, which is, like, one of my autistic interests, and okay, those 2 reasons alone are enough for me. In the US, it's just really loud, and there's no karaoke, so like, what the heck is the point of going? There isn't one. Also, if you're like trying to dance in Finland, people don't try to touch you. In the US, they do. Gross. No thanks. Okay, so yes, but anyway, I had like, it was kind of hard at the beginning, like figuring out how to be friends with people, because I remember my first month being like, wow, I never imagined that living away at college would mean, or like we call it college in the US, you call it uni here, whatever, higher education, whatever, would mean that I only talked to two people, because I came during COVID, so I talked to my roommate, and then there was like some guy across the street who I also talked to who was on the same scholarship program as me. Maybe I had like a few other friends, but that was it. The other issue I often have too is I'm friends with so many different types of people that I kind of have to keep my friends separated from each other, because not all of them will like each other, and then I'm sort of having to play like friend matchmaker in my head and figure out which people are going to get along and which ones aren't. I have some friends who are in like a very like, I only hang out with them sort of like separately category, because they're like, do not play nice with others. It's like a dog that you can't take to the dog park. Yeah. Okay, so it was really weird the first year, because I was like BFFs with my roommate, and then we weren't BFFs anymore. I'm not going to get into that really, but like, that was like a very complicated issue. I'm like trying to think about like how to like succinctly explain it without really explaining it. I think it was like more of she felt betrayed or something by me. That this is what I've come to terms with at this point. And then there was like some other guy. It was a weird triangulation thing where it was like the two of them split off and stopped being friends with me. And honestly, it was very traumatic for me. I still look back at that being one of the most traumatic experiences of my life, because I like genuinely believed I was a bad person after that. Then I started, or continued rather, to keep hanging out with other people, and a lot of people like me. And then I just got to this point where I was like, maybe it's them. Because then I also started thinking about like, well, this is the point at which I'm like trying to be politically correct, and I really gotta like rack my brain for this here. Alright, I'm gonna start with this. A lot of people are introverted and don't really care to have friends. That's all fine and dandy. I totally understand that. For me, given the option of having no friends versus having friends I don't like, I'd rather have no friends too. But the thing that I came to was with these particular people, they had a much harder time making friends with the same level of ease as I did. And then I was kind of like, joke's on them. I can't be that bad of a person. And then, like I said, I moved on. Okay, so that was hard the first year, and then I spent like my third semester being like a little bit of a hermit, because I was like literally afraid of running into them in public, like at the grocery store. I'm not saying any of this makes sense, I'm just explaining this. But this was like not something that I was used to dealing with, because it was like, yeah, I mean, maybe I had weird stuff happen in the past, like let's say there was like I had a crush on somebody, and then I told them, and they were like rejected me. I'm just making this up. Well, no, I'm not, but this is an example, kind of. And then I have to keep seeing that person, and then that's kind of terrible. I have had that happen. Yeah, that sucks too. But this was different, maybe because of the level of interaction of the relationship, where it was like I was literally living with one of these people, and then it was like the relationship went sour. So this is the stuff I'm just saying that like it is a very like Finland problem, and so I think that's why people here do try to be a lot more like gracious maybe with their relationships with other people, because like you can't get rid of people here. They just keep coming back. It's like a boomerang, which I have a boomerang right here. That's hilarious. There was actually some joke about some guy in high school, like Lucio basically, who I ran cross country with. That's like where you run a 5K, and like he would go away and he would always like come back, and so we called him Boomerang, and that's like what this reminds me of. Which is pretty funny. Yes, this boomerang is legit from Australia, so it's like, what do you call it, like OG or something. Okay, so yeah, trying to think now. So the problem was, I'd like to say I learned my lesson one time, and then that stuff stopped happening to me, but it didn't, to be honest with you. And it was basically something that has continued up until fairly recently. I'd say up until like, let's say circa December this past year. And what have I learned? That maybe getting too close to people is a little bit risky, or you just gotta like give it time. So I try to work a lot to build in a natural boundary with that, and like just not let people spend a lot of time with me or get too close to me. Now I have the perfect excuse of having a child, so I'm too busy all the time now. I can literally, I'm so excited to be able to use that as an excuse. Yeah, but it's just like, there's something about like maybe it's part of how I am as a person. Maybe it's part of just like not growing up in this environment and having to sort of like adapt to it and doing not a good job at it. It's just like this kind of environment is incredibly challenging. I think what I kind of came to realize is I'm like it's kind of like having family who's a lot less forgiving. So like I feel like family, there are people who like will cut their family off and not talk to them and stuff. But I feel like with family, you definitely have a lot more room for error in terms of being a jerk. I'm not saying you should. And there still being a resolution or somebody forgiving you or vice versa. Whereas with friends, a lot of times it's like, I don't need to deal with this. I'm disappearing, which is fine. And then a lot of times, it's like misunderstandings, or the other issue is like people not sharing your values. And so this is probably one where I get to like have a very hard time with it because, I don't really like shove my values in people's faces. I don't think that's appropriate. A lot of people will probably disagree with this and they may think, well, no. But here's the thing is like, I'm not like very like, I only want to be friends with people who like agree with my viewpoints on things. Like I'm pretty okay with being friends with anybody as long as they respect that. I may not necessarily agree with them on some stuff. I've always been of the viewpoint that the only person that you really need to like be in full alignment with your values on is like whoever you're planning to raise children with. I would argue that even if you married somebody and you're not planning to raise children, you don't even really need to have the same values. So yeah, I don't know. But I understand like most people don't feel that way, and maybe that's just like, I don't want to say a me problem, but like a me hallmark kind of. But the thing that I'm trying to get at is like that can create problems because at the point at which you start getting very close to people, if you're not like sharing these values, like people sometimes do get mad because you start to get closer to them and sort of the whole blending of selves thing, and it's like doesn't really match their worldview and it's a problem, and so then they kind of like cast you off. Whereas like your family sort of like made you into what you are or influenced you into what you are in some way. I mean that is part of why estrangement happens. Maybe people start having new value systems and it doesn't align with the old value system of the former family, and so then it's a problem. Yeah, I mean, I've also kind of seen this in my family. I've talked a lot on my other channel about being raised in a religious context, and, it does start to become an issue when, like, certain, let's say, members of the family break off from wanting to follow that particular religion, and then it kind of creates a rift. And even though it's like you're trying to act like it's okay, you can tell that sometimes one of the older relatives is like disappointed or something. And so this is something that's like really important for me now that I have a kid. It's just like, unconditional love. This is something I've like kind of discussed a bit in my therapy sessions personally in the past. And it's just like, that's kind of like the point of family is like, especially with kids, like giving them unconditional love because, well, honestly, I think it's part of what teaches them that the world is like a safe and trustworthy place. So, yeah. But anyway, that's something I'm going to try to do. Like, my kid's going to decide whatever she wants to do in her life. That's cool. I'm just here to, like, give advice, but not put pressure and be like, you have to do this, you have to do that. You could always be like, I would like to see you do this, but it's still your choice. An example I've thought of is, like, when she gets to be of working age, I'll be like, I would like you to get a job. These are the jobs I'd like doing, and now you're going to think about what jobs you like doing. I think I've mentioned this example before, but just an example. So yes, the whole point of this is that living in small town Finland, coming from not that kind of environment, is very confusing and it is a whole animal in and of itself. So the next question I would like to know, because I know that this is targeting a primarily Finnish audience, is how do you as Finnish people deal with this? Because very honestly, it is like a challenge that probably in some ways I still continue to face. Like I said, I have sort of this phobia of like keeping boundaries with people so that it doesn't turn into a giant crapshoot like it's already done now like 4 times I think that I can think of. I don't like that. So I really just want to like steer clear of that in the future. And how do you do that? To me, it's like you just don't hang out with somebody every day. But also when you find somebody you like, it is really hard to not want to like hang out with them very regularly. So that's where this gets to be like a bit of a dilemma. But anyway, I think that my duty calls currently. So, well, it's getting close to calling and that's kind of all I have. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk. But for real, like, I'm just trying to point out the differences of like how hard it is. And one thing I've seen also, I'll add real quick, is that a lot of like the international people who come from very densely populated areas, when they come to La Pedranza for like studying at LUT, they so badly want to get out of here that they just, especially if they're master's students, they're like, which makes the most sense because there's only a few bachelor's English programs. They're like, I'm going to move to Helsinki and I'm just going to go to the university when I need to, because, you know, for a while now things have been online. They're trying to get more stuff in person at the university, but it hasn't really exactly been happening at the rate at which I think that they like want. But then there's also a housing problem here. So like, I guess there's less of a housing problem when the people start realizing they don't like it and they move to Helsinki. That's probably what happens. Not me. I am an OG La Pedranza resident. That's true. I have not lived anywhere else in Finland besides La Pedranza. And I think Tampere would be like the only other place I'd want to live. Like if I had to live in Helsinki, I guess. Yeah, maybe not. That's probably not how I really feel. I don't know why I like Tampere better though. I think I've just had like more good experiences being there. I've had fun there every time I go, to be honest. All right, so that's everything. Now I'm gonna go check on sleeping child. Yeah, but thank you for watching my channel, and I will try to keep talking about like Finland relevant things here, my experience in Finland, recounting some things, current things, how things are going with raising a child in Finland. So far, pretty chill. I'll be honest, we have dryers in the US, and so the whole not having a dryer here is like starting to get to me a little bit. But first world problems, whatever. All right, well, thank you again for your support of this channel. Please like and subscribe at the rate at which you would like to, and I will try to keep this up. And yeah, also let me know what topics you would like to hear about, being an international person in Finland. Thank you. All right, until next time, bye.